They fired him publicly and unjustly. So he ended their business quietly. Part 2. Trevor barely slept after that message appeared on his screen. By sunrise, he was already inside Blackridge headquarters, pacing aggressively across his office while city light slowly spilled through the glass walls around him. The dark circles beneath his eyes had deepened overnight. His expensive suit looked rushed for the first time in years. Even his hands trembled slightly whenever his phone buzzed. He kept replaying the message in his head. You should have just fired me quietly. Now everyone pays. The words felt less like a threat and more like a promise. Meanwhile, the operations floor outside his office had become unusually tense. Employees whispered constantly between cubicles. Managers moved faster. Conversations stopped whenever executives passed by. Something invisible had shifted inside the company. People could feel it, like the pressure before a building collapse. At 9 sharp, Warren Vale stormed into the executive conference room, carrying a tablet tightly in one hand. Everyone immediately straightened in their chairs. Trevor, legal, finance directors, senior operations managers. The atmosphere inside the room felt suffocating. Warren threw the tablet across the table. What the hell is this? The screen displayed a leaked internal expense report currently circulating through several industry forums online. Unauthorized offshore transfers. Executive travel expenses disguised as infrastructure costs. Supplier kickback patterns. The room fell silent instantly. Trevor forced himself to remain calm. We're containing it. Containing it? Warren snapped. 3 clients called me before sunrise. One of the finance directors cleared his throat nervously. The leak hasn't gone publicly yet. Mostly industry chatter. Yet, Warren repeated coldly. Nobody spoke. Warren's eyes locked onto Trevor. You assured me Adrian Cole would disappear quietly. Trevor swallowed. He's trying to scare us. No, Warren replied sharply. He's dismantling us. The room remained dead silent. Outside the conference windows, employees pretended to work while secretly watching executives argue through the glass. Rumors spread rapidly. People sensed weakness at the top, and weakness inside corporations spreads like blood in water. Several floors below, Mia sat at her desk pretending to review invoices while secretly monitoring internal system traffic through hidden backdoor access Adrian had shown her years earlier. Her heartbeat quickened as she noticed unusual activity. Emergency legal reviews. Data suppression requests. Massive overnight file deletions. Blackridge was panicking. Her phone vibrated quietly beneath the desk. Adrian. She answered immediately, but kept her voice low. They're scrubbing everything. I expected that. You were right about the supplier accounts too. They're rerouting money again. A brief silence followed. Then Adrian spoke calmly. Send me the authorization chains. Mia hesitated. Adrian, this is getting dangerous. Outside her cubicle, several employees walked past discussing the leaks nervously. One whispered, I heard federal auditors are already looking into it. Another replied quietly, something huge is happening. Mia lowered her voice further. How far are you planning to take this? Across town, Adrian sat inside a rented office above an old print shop near the industrial district. The room smelled faintly of dust, paper, and burnt coffee. Rainwater still clung to the windows from the previous night's storm, while traffic noises drifted upward from the street below. The space looked nothing like a corporate office. No polished glass. No expensive artwork. Just folding tables covered in documents, laptops, handwritten notes, and financial diagrams pinned across the walls. A war room. Adrian studied multiple screens while speaking to her through an encrypted call. As far as necessary. His voice remained disturbingly calm. Mia closed her eyes briefly. You know they'll come after you harder now. They already destroyed my career. That's not all they can destroy. Adrian looked toward one wall covered entirely in executive payment networks connected to shell companies. They built their entire business by threatening people into silence. He clicked open another confidential file. This time they picked the wrong person. Mia heard something in his voice, then that unsettled her deeply. Not rage. Not revenge. Conviction. Cold, controlled conviction. After ending the call, Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair and stared at the largest document pinned to the wall. Blackridge Expansion Project, Phase 7. At first glance, it looked like a normal infrastructure growth initiative. But hidden inside the contracts sat the real operation. Illegal labor outsourcing, regulatory bribery, insurance fraud, environmental compliance manipulation. Hundreds of millions of dollars buried beneath layers of corporate complexity. Adrian had discovered it almost a year earlier while restructuring operational logistics. At the time, he convinced himself it was probably legal, probably explainable, probably temporary. Because accepting the truth back then would have meant accepting that the company he sacrificed his life for was rotten to its core. Now he knew better. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. Calvin Reese entered carrying a paper bag of takeout food and several newspapers tucked beneath one arm. You look terrible, Calvin said immediately. Thanks. I mean it professionally. Calvin tossed a sandwich onto the table before dropping heavily into a nearby chair. You've got journalists sniffing around already. Adrian looked up. How many? Enough. Calvin unfolded one newspaper and pointed toward a small business section headline discussing unusual financial instability inside Blackridge. The story itself remained cautious, but the damage had started. Public suspicion was growing. Calvin studied Adrian carefully. You understand what happens once this fully breaks. Adrian opened another financial archive. Blackridge collapses. No, Calvin corrected. I mean to you. Adrian finally looked at him. These people framed me for crimes. And now you're dismantling a billion-dollar corporation from a rented office. The older man leaned forward. That kind of humiliation changes people. Adrian remained silent. Calvin nodded slowly. Yeah, he murmured. That's what worries me. Hours later, Trevor sat inside an upscale restaurant downtown across from a sharply dressed man named Victor Hale. Victor did not officially work for Blackridge. Officially, unofficially, he handled problems corporations preferred to keep invisible. Private investigations, damage control, intimidation. Trevor kept checking the restaurant windows nervously while lowering his voice. I need to know what Adrian Cole has. Victor calmly sliced into his steak. You already hired internal cybersecurity. They're useless. Victor chewed slowly before replying. Then perhaps your former employee is smarter than you described. Trevor's jaw tightened. He's not supposed to be doing this. Victor almost smiled. People rarely behave conveniently after public humiliation. The restaurant buzzed softly around them with wealthy conversations, clinking wine glasses, and distant jazz music. Trevor leaned closer. I need this stopped. Victor wiped his mouth carefully. That depends. On what? How desperate you are. Trevor hesitated briefly, then lowered his voice further. He can't go public. Victor studied him for several long seconds. You executives always make the same mistake. Trevor frowned. You assume quiet people are harmless. Elsewhere across the city, Adrian sat alone in his temporary office long after midnight. The industrial district outside had grown almost silent except for distant truck engines and occasional train horns echoing through the darkness. Most people in the city slept peacefully. But inside Blackridge headquarters, entire departments remained awake, trying desperately to stop invisible damage spreading through the company. Adrian reviewed internal communications carefully. Executives were turning against each other already. Fear does that. Once trust fractures inside corrupt systems, survival instincts take over. People begin protecting themselves, blaming others, hiding evidence, making mistakes. And Adrian intended to accelerate every second of it. His laptop chimed softly. New message. Unknown sender. He opened it carefully. We need to talk. No lawyers. No police. Come alone. Attached beneath the message sat a time and location. An underground parking garage near the riverfront. Adrian stared at the screen expressionlessly. Then another message arrived seconds later. I know who really set you up. His eyes narrowed slowly. Because there was one thing bothering him since the public firing. Trevor was corrupt, cowardly, manipulative, but not intelligent enough to orchestrate everything alone. Someone else had built the operation. Someone smarter. Someone hidden. And Adrian suddenly realized he might finally be getting closer to them. The next evening, freezing wind swept through the nearly abandoned riverfront district while dark clouds moved heavily above the skyline. Streetlights reflected dimly across wet pavement. The underground parking structure sat partially empty beneath an old commercial building scheduled for demolition. Concrete pillars cast long shadows beneath flickering fluorescent lights while distant water dripped steadily somewhere in the darkness. Adrian entered cautiously with both hands inside his coat pockets. Every sound echoed. Every movement felt amplified. He scanned the structure carefully. Empty vehicles, oil stains, concrete, silence. Then footsteps emerged from deeper inside the garage. A woman stepped forward slowly from the shadows. Tall, composed, elegant even in darkness. Her long black coat moved slightly in the cold wind while sharp gray eyes studied Adrian carefully. Recognition hit him instantly. Claire Holloway, former chief compliance officer at Blackridge. She had resigned suddenly nearly 10 months earlier without explanation. At the time, executives claimed she left for personal reasons. Now Adrian knew that was a lie. Claire stopped several feet away. You came alone. So did you. A faint smile crossed her face. Good. Adrian kept his expression guarded. You said you know who set me up. I do. The parking garage hummed faintly around them. Claire glanced toward the city skyline visible through openings in the concrete structure. Trevor was only the delivery mechanism. Adrian's eyes hardened. Who gave the order? Claire looked directly at him. Warren didn't build the fraud operation. A long pause followed. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. Blackridge has been laundering money for powerful people outside the company for years. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. Claire stepped closer. And the moment you started uncovering financial inconsistencies, they marked you as a liability. The cold air suddenly felt heavier, more dangerous, because Adrian realized this was no longer about revenge against executives. This was something far bigger, far uglier, and somewhere deep inside Blackridge. People far more dangerous than Trevor Gaines were beginning to notice him. The wind howled through the parking structure like a warning. For several long seconds, Adrian simply stared at Claire Holloway while distant traffic echoed faintly above them. Her expression remained calm, but he could see exhaustion buried beneath her composure. Not ordinary exhaustion, the kind carried by people who had spent too long living beside dangerous truths. You're telling me Blackridge launders money, Adrian said carefully. Claire shook her head slowly. No, I'm telling you Blackridge became the laundering mechanism. Cold air drifted through the concrete levels around them. Adrian's jaw tightened. For who? Claire hesitated. That hesitation alone terrified him more than any answer. Finally, she spoke quietly. Investment groups, political intermediaries, offshore procurement networks, people wealthy enough to disappear problems. Adrian's mind immediately connected dozens of inconsistencies from previous years. Inflated transportation contracts, phantom infrastructure expenses, government-linked vendor approvals that bypassed compliance reviews. Suddenly everything made sense. Blackridge had not grown rapidly because it was brilliant. It grew rapidly because powerful people were feeding it money disguised as legitimate expansion. and anyone who threatened exposure became expendable. Like him. Claire stepped closer. When I discovered what was happening, I tried reporting it internally. Adrian already knew how that ended. They silenced you. They tried. Her eyes darkened slightly. I resigned before they could frame me too. The parking garage lights flickered overhead. Adrian looked toward the shadows instinctively. You said they marked me as a liability. They started watching you months ago. His expression hardened. Because of the audit discrepancies. Yes. Claire folded her arms against the cold. You were too good at your job, Adrian. You kept finding operational gaps that led directly into hidden financial routes. He suddenly remembered Trevor constantly redirecting him away from certain vendor investigations. The strange legal restrictions. The altered records. The missing authorizations. Trevor had not been protecting the company. He had been protecting the people behind it. Claire's voice lowered further. After you built those backup redundancies in the system, they panicked. Adrian's eyes narrowed. They knew I had access. They knew eventually you would understand what you were looking at. Silence settled heavily between them. Then Adrian asked the question that mattered most. Why help me now? Claire looked toward the city lights beyond the parking structure. Because they destroyed innocent people for years. A bitter laugh escaped her quietly. And because you're the first person who's ever actually hurt them. Elsewhere across the city, Trevor sat inside Warren Vale's penthouse office with sweat forming beneath his collar despite the cold air conditioning. The atmosphere inside the room had become unbearable over the past week. Phone calls stopped abruptly whenever Trevor entered meetings. Legal teams avoided eye contact. Executives whispered privately behind closed doors. Fear was spreading upward now, and Warren looked furious. You hired Victor Hale without informing me. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. I needed damage control. You needed discretion. Warren slammed a folder onto the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of additional leaked financial documents already spreading through financial media forums. Supplier fraud. Executive kickbacks. Foreign routing transfers. Trevor's voice tightened. He's escalating. No, Warren snapped coldly. He's exposing. The older man moved toward the massive windows overlooking downtown. For the first time in years, he looked old. Truly old. You should have buried this cleaner. Trevor stared at him carefully. What does that mean? Warren slowly turned around, and the silence that followed suddenly terrified Trevor. Because something had changed in Warren's eyes. Calculation. Distance. Trevor felt his stomach tighten. You're blaming me. Warren said nothing. That silence became the answer. The realization hit Trevor instantly. If Blackridge collapsed, someone would need to absorb responsibility. Someone disposable. Someone already connected publicly to Adrian's firing. Trevor stepped backward slightly. You said we were protected. Warren's expression became emotionless again. We are. The meaning behind those words landed like ice in Trevor's chest. We, not you. For the first time since this nightmare began, Trevor understood something horrifying. The people above Warren would sacrifice anyone necessary to survive, including him. Meanwhile, Adrian and Claire sat inside the rented industrial office reviewing documents until nearly dawn. Stacks of printed records covered the tables. Coffee cups accumulated beside laptops. The room smelled of exhaustion and paper ink, while fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Claire opened another encrypted archive. You need to understand something before you release this. Adrian looked up. If you go public carelessly, they'll discredit you immediately. I know. They'll call you unstable. Vindictive. A disgruntled employee seeking revenge. A faint humorless smile crossed Adrian's face. They already are. Claire remained serious. That's why evidence alone isn't enough. She slid several documents toward him. These are internal communications between Blackridge and external financial coordinators. Adrian reviewed them carefully. Then his eyes hardened. Political consulting firms. Offshore banking references. Private acquisition groups. This reached far beyond ordinary corporate fraud. Claire pointed toward one specific communication chain. Those names never appear publicly together. Adrian looked closer and suddenly understood. Blackridge was connected to a network powerful enough to survive scandals by controlling narratives before they spread. Which meant one thing. If he attacked publicly without precision, he would disappear professionally, legally, maybe even physically. Claire watched realization settle across his face. Now you understand. Adrian leaned back silently. For the first time since his firing, doubt crept into his mind. Not fear for himself. Fear of what he was actually standing against. The room fell quiet. Then Claire spoke softly. You can still walk away. Adrian looked at her. No. You don't owe the world this fight. His voice became calm again. I'm not doing this for the world. He stared at the wall covered in evidence. I'm doing this because people like them survive by convincing ordinary people they're untouchable. Claire studied him carefully. And are they? Adrian slowly closed the laptop in front of him. Not anymore. 3 days later, Blackridge Commerce Solutions opened for business like any normal Monday morning. Employees entered beneath shining lobby lights carrying coffees and backpacks while giant digital displays promoted innovation, trust, and leadership. But beneath the polished surface, panic quietly consumed the company. Executives moved urgently through hallways. Emergency legal meetings continued nonstop. Several major clients delayed contract renewals. Financial journalists began requesting interviews. Something catastrophic was approaching. Nobody knew exactly when, only that it was coming. At precisely 9:15 that morning, every screen inside Blackridge headquarters suddenly froze. Computers, conference displays, lobby televisions, executive tablets, everything. Employees looked around in confusion as monitors flickered simultaneously across every department floor. Then a single video appeared. Adrian, The operations floor fell completely silent. Executives rushed from offices in shock. Trevor froze near the elevators as his blood drained from his face. Warren emerged from the conference hall like a man watching his empire catch fire in real time. On every screen, Adrian sat calmly inside the industrial office wearing a simple dark shirt beneath dim lighting. No anger, no shouting, just terrifying composure. His voice echoed throughout the building. For years, Blackridge Commerce Solutions presented itself as a model corporation. Employees stared motionlessly at screens around them. Integrity, leadership, accountability. Behind Adrian, confidential documents began appearing one after another. Bank transfers, executive approvals, fraudulent contracts, hidden payment networks. The entire building descended into chaos. What you actually built, Adrian continued calmly, was a machine designed to exploit employees, manipulate regulators, and protect criminal financial operations hidden beneath corporate branding. Trevor immediately screamed toward IT personnel nearby. Shut it down. But nothing responded. Adrian's voice continued across every screen. You publicly accused me of crimes you committed yourselves. More documents appeared. Then recordings. Private executive conversations. Supplier negotiations. Evidence. Real evidence. Employees began staring toward Trevor, toward Warren, toward executives. And for the first time, those powerful men looked afraid. True fear. Not corporate stress. Survival fear. Adrian's eyes remained steady on screen. You believed humiliation would silence me. Outside the building, news alerts suddenly exploded across phones throughout the city. Journalists rushed toward Blackridge headquarters. Social media erupted instantly. Financial markets reacted within minutes. The company's stock began collapsing publicly in real time. Inside the building, security officers received incoming federal contact notices almost simultaneously. Panic spread everywhere. Employees cried. Executives shouted. Phones rang uncontrollably. Then Adrian delivered the final blow. I backed up everything. The screen shifted again. Encrypted archives uploaded live across multiple media networks. Independent journalists. Federal agencies. International financial investigators. Every file released simultaneously. Impossible to suppress. Impossible to contain. And Adrian ended with one final sentence. You should have just fired me quietly. The screens went black. Silence swallowed the building. Then complete chaos erupted. Within hours, federal investigators stormed Blackridge headquarters. Executives attempted emergency resignations. Several disappeared before authorities arrived. News helicopters circled above downtown, while reporters flooded every entrance. Trevor Gaines tried leaving through underground parking. Federal agents stopped him before he reached his car. The expression on his face carried pure disbelief. As though powerful people like him were never supposed to face consequences personally. Warren Vale vanished before dawn. Authorities later discovered he fled through a private charter route connected to offshore accounts. But his empire was already dead. Completely dead. Clients abandoned Blackridge overnight. Investors withdrew immediately. Internal communications leaked globally. The company collapsed within weeks. Thousands lost jobs. Executives faced investigations across multiple countries. And the story dominated international headlines for months. But strangely, Adrian disappeared too. No interviews. No public appearances. No media deals. Nothing. People searched endlessly for him online. Some called him a hero. Others called him dangerous, vindictive, ruthless, corporate terrorism disguised as justice. But nobody truly knew where he went. Almost 6 months later, on a quiet autumn evening far from the city, Adrian sat alone outside a small lakeside cabin surrounded by pine trees and cold wind. The world there felt slower, cleaner, real. A faint orange sunset reflected across the water while distant birds crossed the darkening sky overhead. Inside the cabin, a small radio quietly discussed ongoing federal trials connected to the Blackridge scandal. Adrian switched it off. Silence returned peacefully. He leaned back in the wooden chair and closed his eyes briefly while cold air moved through the trees around him. For the first time in years, no meetings, no lies, no pretending, just quiet. His phone buzzed softly on the table beside him. A message from Mia. You finally sleeping normally yet? A faint smile crossed his face. He typed slowly, working on it. A moment later, another message appeared. You ever regret it? Adrian stared across the lake for a long time before answering. The water moved gently beneath the fading sunset. The empire that destroyed him no longer existed. Every executive who mocked him had lost everything. But revenge, he realized, was strange. It didn't heal wounds. It only balanced them. Finally, he typed his response. No. Then after another pause, he added one final message. But I'll never give another company the power to destroy me again. The wind moved softly through the trees. Darkness slowly settled across the lake. And somewhere far away, in cities built on greed, power, and polished lies, people in expensive offices quietly remembered what happened to Blackridge and became very careful about who they humiliated publicly. Honestly, what would you have done if you were in that situation? Let us know. And if this story caught you off guard, there are plenty more stories like this here on the channel. Make sure you subscribe, and don't forget to like and leave a comment. Thanks.